heavy,
bored.
And, you know, I mentioned this in the monologue, but like the main problem with all these kind of like hodgepodges of philosophies that's kind of collaged together in this book, it makes it so that there's so many kind of hodgepodge thrown together things that there's no coherent, clear vision or theme beyond, again, Snyder's personal kind of convictions or religious-like adherence to this kind of environmentalist ideology. And that's really why it doesn't work. Is because it's kind of too jumbled. There's not a cut through that cuts all these things together, even though I'm sure many would argue with me about that, and even Snyder would argue about that, but I don't see it on the page as somebody reading this trying to be as objective as possible. But on pages 44 and 45, we have the poem It Pleases and the poem Hemp. Of course there's a poem called Hemp in this fucking hippie book, but alright. These two poems on page 44 and 45 was where I started to realize how kind of boring and shallow a lot of these poems are, and how they're just kind of like descriptions of almost these kind of boring normal events that Snyder wants us to see romanticized into something more. But it always, again, this is why I brought up the no through line, because there's so little kind of clarity to the overall theme or vision here. It's much too broad, as I said in the monologue, that all we get is this kind of plain vanilla, vague, so that means that it fails to make the reader really feel what I think he was going for. And that's the main reason I consider this book to be a failure, not working. So Straight Creek, Great Burn. This is a poem. It's a little bit long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let me read the last couple stanzas. And I just think that the final stanza, my main complaint with this one is that the final stanza, I feel, is a cop-out. With the inconsistent capitalization and the sentence structure, it all strikes me as more of an oversight than a technique, right? So even if he was claiming that this was some technique he was using to subvert our expectations, it doesn't work, and it doesn't actually develop its own kind of logic. It's just random, and that therefore leading me to think it's chaotic and or an oversight, or like I keep saying, a laziness. So let's read these last couple stanzas here. A whoosh of birds swoops up and round, tilts back, almost always flying all apart, and yet hangs on, together, never a leader, all of one swift, empty, dancing mind. They arc and loop, and then their flight is done. They settle down. End of poem. End of poem. Oh my God. That was the big thing that just kind of blew my lid off, where I was like, oof, I do not like this book. Do not like that little sentence there, that little cop-out thing. Ugh. End of poem. And why do we think that's there, listeners? Why would somebody put end of poem in there? It reminds me of almost internet culture. It's like end of tweet, right? That is all. End of poem. It's bullshit. I don't like it. I'm sure there's others. I'm sure there are people out there that have differing opinions on it, but you know, that's my take on it. And this is the final.
Inner.
resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.